March 15, 1960, Monument Valley, Utah. Red Kellerman had rigged explosives for 37 Western films. He knew exactly how much black powder to use. That's why when the charges went off 3 seconds early during the Alamo siege scene, killing grip operator Tommy Brennan instantly, Red knew it wasn't his mistake. John Wayne himself walked over to Red as they loaded Tommy's body into the ambulance. The Duke's face was stone. His words were quiet. "This never happened the way you think it did." 2 days later, Wayne handed Tommy's widow an envelope. Inside was enough money to buy 3 houses and a contract that would seal her silence forever. For 60 years, Red kept that secret buried in the desert sand, until the day a woman claiming to be Tommy's daughter showed up at his ranch with questions that could bury them all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman stood in Red Kellerman's doorway like a ghost materializing from the desert heat. Blood trickled from a gash above her left temple, her white blouse torn at the shoulder. Behind her, tire tracks carved fresh wounds in the red dirt, disappearing toward the highway where dust still hung in the air like smoke. "They found me," she gasped, stumbling forward. "They know I'm here." Red's weathered hands instinctively moved to the shotgun mounted beside the doorframe. At 64, his reflexes weren't what they'd been during his stuntman days, but 30 years of Monument Valley isolation had kept his survival instincts sharp. Through the screen door's mesh, he watched her glance nervously over her shoulder at the empty road. "Who found you, miss?" "The same people who've been watching you." Her green eyes locked onto his. "The same ones who killed my father." The words hit Red like a physical blow. Tommy Brennan, the name he'd buried alongside too many bottles of whiskey and sleepless nights. He studied the woman's face, high cheekbones, that stubborn Irish jaw he remembered from Tommy's profile. But Tommy had never mentioned a daughter, never mentioned much family at all, except for the wife who'd taken Wayne's money and disappeared. Tommy Brennan never had kids. Tommy Brennan had a lot of secrets. She pulled a manila envelope from her jacket, the same type Wayne had given to Tommy's widow all those years ago. "Just like you do." Red's mouth went dry. The desert wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on his porch. In the distance, a vehicle's engine growled, growing closer, not farther away. "We need to get inside. Now." The woman pushed past him into the ranch house's dim interior. "Unless you want to explain to Wayne's people why you're talking to me." Red slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. The ranch house was modest, a living room with furniture that had seen better decades, a kitchen where coffee cups accumulated like archaeological evidence, and walls decorated with faded photographs from movie sets he'd rather forget. The woman moved to the window, peering through blinds that filtered the harsh Utah sun into prison bar shadows. "What's your name?" Red asked. "Sarah. Sarah Brennan." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of yellowed letters tied with string. "These belong to my father, hidden in a safety deposit box for 60 years. Red recognized Tommy's handwriting immediately, the same careful script that had labeled equipment boxes and signed time cards. His chest tightened. "Where did you get those?" "My mother left them to me when she died last month, along with instructions to find you." Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge. Seems she had a crisis of conscience on her deathbed. Funny how mortality makes people honest. The sound of tires on gravel made them both freeze. Red moved to another window and saw a black SUV parked at his gate, engine running. The windows were tinted, but he could make out 2 figures in the front seats, waiting. "How long have they been following you?" "Since Phoenix. Maybe longer." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letters. "I thought I lost them in Flagstaff, but—" She gestured toward the window. Red's mind raced through possibilities. His ranch sat on 80 acres of scrubland, bordered by BLM territory and a maze of canyons that could hide an army. But those same canyons could trap them if the wrong people controlled the exits. What do those letters say? That the explosion wasn't an accident. That my father discovered something about Wayne, something worth killing for. Sarah untied the string with shaking fingers. "And that you were supposed to die with him." The words hung in the air like cordite smoke. Red had suspected the truth for decades, but hearing it spoken aloud made his knees weak. He sank into his recliner, the same chair where he'd spent countless nights trying to drink away the memory of Tommy's final scream. "Wayne saved my life that day," Red said quietly. "Sent me to check the backup charges on the other side of the fort. Said he needed someone he trusted to verify the setup. Or maybe he needed you out of the blast radius." Sarah pulled out the first letter and unfolded it carefully. "According to this, my father had photographs, pictures of Wayne with someone he shouldn't have been with, someone powerful enough to destroy his career." The SUV's engine shut off. Red heard car doors slam. "Back door," he whispered, grabbing the shotgun and a box of shells from the hall closet. "We can reach the stables. Take my truck through the canyon road." Sarah clutched the letters to her chest. "These are the only proof we have. Those letters won't matter if we're dead." Footsteps approached the front porch. Heavy boots, more than 2 sets. Red counted at least 4 men, moving with the practiced coordination of professionals. Someone knocked on the door. 3 measured raps, almost polite. "Mr. Kellerman, we'd like to have a conversation. Hope you're enjoying this deep dive into Hollywood's buried secrets. Drop a comment below telling us what state or country you're reading from. We love seeing our community spread across the globe. And if this story is giving you chills, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we're revealing something about John Wayne that will completely change how you see this case." Red's finger found the shotgun's safety, muscle memory from decades of desert living overriding the arthritis in his joints. The polite knock came again, patient as a rattlesnake's warning. Through the thin walls of the ranch house, he could hear his cattle lowing in the distance, the same Herefords he'd raised from calves, the only living things that depended on him now. "Mr. Kellerman, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." The voice carried a slight accent. East Coast, educated. Not the kind of man who belonged in Monument Valley's brutal landscape. Red had built his life here precisely to avoid such voices, such complications. The red rock formations that surrounded his property had been his sanctuary for 3 decades, a place where the ghosts of Hollywood couldn't follow. Sarah pressed herself against the kitchen wall, clutching Tommy's letters like a lifeline. In the filtered sunlight, Red could see the resemblance more clearly, not just in her bone structure, but in the way she held herself when cornered. Tommy had possessed that same coiled tension, the instinct of someone who'd grown up fighting for everything he'd earned. Red's eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, where a single photograph sat in a tarnished silver frame. Him and Tommy on the set of the Alamo, both grinning despite the Texas heat, both young enough to believe they were building legends instead of participating in their destruction. Tommy's arm was slung around Red's shoulders, the easy camaraderie of 2 men who trusted each other with their lives daily. The memory twisted in Red's chest like an old knife wound. He'd kept that photograph for 30 years, the only remnant of his Hollywood life he couldn't bring himself to burn. Every morning when he made coffee, he faced Tommy's smile. Every night when he locked up the house, Tommy's eyes followed him to bed. "We have a mutual friend, Mr. Kellerman. Someone who's very interested in preserving certain legacies." Red's jaw tightened. Even now, 64 years old and broken down like an old truck, they still reached for him through Wayne's shadow. The Duke had been dead for 43 years, but his influence stretched across decades like the long shadows of Monument Valley's spires. Through the kitchen window, Red could see his workshop where he spent most evenings now, a converted barn where he restored antique firearms for collectors and museums. The familiar smell of gun oil and steel wool, the precision required to bring dead mechanisms back to life, had become his meditation. Each restored rifle or pistol was a small victory against entropy, against the way time corroded everything it touched. Sarah caught him staring and whispered, "Is there another way out?" Red nodded toward the rear of the house, where a mudroom connected to his workshop. Beyond that, a network of cattle trails wound through the canyons toward the highway. But those trails required daylight to navigate safely, and the sun was already beginning its descent behind the western mesas. His border collie, Rex, was still out with the herd, a blessing, since the dog's protective instincts would have announced their visitors long before they'd reached the porch. Red had found Rex as a pup, abandoned on the highway after a truck accident. For 8 years, the dog had been his closest companion, sleeping by his bed, riding shotgun in his pickup, never questioning Red's long silences or the nights when whiskey made him weep. The cattle would need bringing in before full dark. It was Tuesday, which meant he'd planned to ride out to the north pasture and check the water tank that had been giving him trouble. Simple routines that had structured his exile, keeping him anchored to something real and immediate. "Mr. Kellerman, we're not going anywhere. We have all day." Sarah's breathing had grown shallow. The letters rustled in her trembling hands, and Red caught a glimpse of Tommy's handwriting. Neat, deliberate letters that spelled out accusations he'd never been alive to voice. Whatever secrets Tommy had discovered, they'd followed his daughter across 30 years and 1,000 miles of desert. Red thought of his neighbors, the Navajo family who ran cattle on the adjacent section, the Park Service rangers who occasionally stopped by for coffee, the feed store owner in Mexican hat who'd been extending credit for 2 seasons while Red's finances crumbled, people who'd accepted him without questions, who'd become the closest thing to family he'd known since leaving Los Angeles. The ranch was failing, had been for years, but it was his failure, clean and honest in a way his Hollywood success had never been. Every broken fence post and rusted gate told the story of a man trying to build something with his own hands, something that couldn't be destroyed by studio executives or buried in unmarked graves. "They're waiting us out," Sarah whispered. Red checked his watch, an ancient Timex that had survived 3 decades of ranch work. Nearly 4 o'clock. In 2 hours, the sun would begin to set, and the desert would transform from furnace to freezer. His visitors might be patient, but they weren't prepared for a Monument Valley night. The question was whether he and Sarah could survive long enough to test their endurance. Red set the shotgun against the wall and moved to Sarah's side, his weathered fingers gently taking one of the yellowed letters from her trembling hands. Tommy's handwriting stared back at him, as familiar as his own reflection, yet carrying secrets that had remained buried for 6 decades. "Show me," he whispered. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded the first letter, dated March 15, 1960, 2 weeks before the explosion. The paper crackled like autumn leaves, threatening to disintegrate at their touch. Red's eyes tracked across Tommy's careful script, each word landing like a physical blow. "Red, if something happens to me, you need to know the truth. Wayne isn't the man we thought we were protecting. The photos I found in Buddy Morrison's trailer change everything. Morrison was blackmailing half the studio. But Wayne was paying him to keep quiet about more than just his politics. There's a woman, a senator's wife, and the pictures Morrison had could destroy more than just careers. They could bring down the whole damn government contract that's funding this picture." Red's vision blurred. He sank into the kitchen chair, the weight of 30 years crashing down on his shoulders. Outside, their visitors maintained their patient vigil, but the immediate threat seemed to fade against the enormity of what he was reading. "Keep going," Sarah urged, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. The second letter was shorter, written in Tommy's increasingly frantic handwriting. "Morrison's dead. They're saying heart attack, but I saw the needle mark behind his ear. Wayne came to my hotel room tonight, offered me 10 grand to disappear, said I didn't understand the forces at play. He's right, I don't, but I understand murder when I see it. I'm hiding the photos where they'll never think to look. If something happens to me, check the false bottom in my tackle box. The one you helped me build last summer?" Red's hands began to shake. He remembered that tackle box, an afternoon project during a rare break in filming, both of them sitting in the shade of Tommy's Airstream trailer, sharing a bottle of beer while they worked with tiny screws and wood stain. Tommy had been meticulous, crafting the hidden compartment with the same care he brought to rigging explosives. "There's more," Sarah said softly, pulling out a third letter. This one was different. Hastily scrawled, the ink smeared as if Tommy had been sweating while he wrote. "They moved up the big explosion scene. Wayne says there's weather coming, but the sky's been clear for days. Morrison's heart attack was 3 days ago, and now they want to blow the whole fort tomorrow instead of next week. Red, I need you to stay away from the charges. I think they're going to blame the accident on faulty wiring. My faulty wiring. But I've never made a mistake with explosives in 15 years, and I'm not starting now. I'm going to document everything before tomorrow's shoot. Every wire, every charge, every connection. If they're planning to kill me, I'm going to make damn sure the evidence survives." Red's coffee mug slipped from his numb fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Outside, the men on his porch had gone quiet, as if they were listening for signs of life within the house. "My God," Red whispered. He knew. Tommy knew they were going to kill him, and he still went through with the scene. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust across her cheek. "There's one more. Written the night before he died." The final letter was barely legible, Tommy's normally steady hand reduced to desperate scratches. "Red, I was wrong about Wayne. He's not the one pulling the strings. Came to my trailer tonight, looked like he'd been crying. Says there are studio people, government people, that make the decisions now. Says he tried to stop it, but they told him they'd destroy everything. His career, his family, his legacy. He begged me to run, offered me his own money, not the studio's. I told him I couldn't. These pictures, they show things that could get a lot of innocent people killed if they fall into the wrong hands. But keeping them secret means letting murderers walk free. Wayne said he'd make sure you were safe tomorrow, keep you away from the blast zone. He said to tell you he was sorry, that this wasn't supposed to be the way heroes were made. I don't know what that means, but I trust you'll figure it out. Take care of yourself, partner. And if my daughter ever comes looking for answers, tell her I tried to do the right thing." The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sound of their watchers shifting position outside. Red stared at the letters scattered across his table. 30 years of guilt and self-recrimination destroyed in a matter of minutes. Wayne hadn't betrayed them. Wayne had saved him while being powerless to save Tommy. "My mother never told me about the tackle box," Sarah said quietly. "She said Wayne gave her money and a promise that whoever killed my father would never hurt us. She believed him. Red's old life, his careful exile, his manageable guilt, his simple routines, crumbled like the ancient paper in his hands. There could be no going back to ignorance now." Red folded the letters with trembling hands, trying to piece together 30 years of shattered assumptions. The silence from the front porch had stretched too long. Their visitors were either planning something or listening for movement inside the house. He caught Sarah's eye and pointed toward the back door, but she shook her head, clutching the manila envelope to her chest. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something my mother made me promise to tell you." Before Red could respond, his landline rang. The shrill sound cut through the tension like a blade, and both of them froze. The phone sat on the kitchen counter, its red message light blinking. He'd been ignoring calls all week, letting the machine handle what few people still bothered to reach him. On the fourth ring, his answering machine clicked on. Red's own voice, recorded years ago when he still believed isolation could keep the past buried. "You've reached Red Kellerman. Leave a message." The voice that followed made Red's blood turn to ice water. "Hello, Red. It's been too long." Sarah's face went white. She recognized the voice, smooth, cultured, carrying the weight of decades and untold wealth. Red knew it too, though he'd hoped never to hear it again. "I assume you're entertaining a visitor today. A young woman asking uncomfortable questions. We've been watching her progress with great interest." A pause, filled with the sound of expensive leather creaking. "She's not who she claims to be, Red. Ask her about her real father. Ask her about Marcus Webb." The line went dead. Red's knees gave out, and he slumped against the kitchen counter. Marcus Webb. After 30 years, that name still had the power to stop his heart. Webb had been Morrison's partner in the blackmail scheme, the man who'd taken the photographs, who'd arranged the meetings, who'd disappeared the night Morrison died. "You're not Tommy's daughter," Red said, his voice hollow. Sarah's mask finally slipped. The grief, the righteous anger, the trembling vulnerability, all of it fell away like shed skin. What remained was something harder, colder. Her green eyes held no warmth now, only calculation. "Tommy Brennan never had children," she said, confirming what Red had known in his bones from the beginning. "But Marcus Webb did, and my father spent 30 years in hiding because of what happened on that set." Red reached for the shotgun, but Sarah was faster. A small pistol appeared in her hand, a .38 snub-nose that looked like a toy but could punch through his ribs just fine. She'd been carrying it all along, probably tucked against the small of her back where his old eyes couldn't spot it. "Webb died last month," she continued, her voice steady now, professional. "Cancer. Spent his final weeks telling me stories about the good old days in Hollywood. when men like him cleaned up messes for people with too much to lose. He told me about Tommy Brennan, about Buddy Morrison, about the photographs that could have brought down a government. Outside, Red heard engines starting. Not just the SUV, multiple vehicles surrounding his property. The patient men on his porch had been stalling, waiting for reinforcements to get into position. "My father never got his fair share," Sarah said, keeping the gun trained on Red's chest. "Morrison died before he could pay what he owed. Wayne's people made sure Webb disappeared before he could claim his cut. 30 years of poverty, Red. 30 years of watching other people get rich off secrets my father helped create." Red's mind raced through possibilities, but they all led to the same conclusion. Sarah, if that was even her real name, hadn't come seeking truth about Tommy's death. She'd come seeking revenge for her father's exile. "What do you want?" "The photographs. The real ones. The ones Tommy hid in that tackle box before they killed him." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "My dying father told me something interesting, Red. He said Tommy Brennan was too honest for his own good. Said if Tommy had found the photographs, he wouldn't have destroyed them. He would have hidden them somewhere safe, somewhere only his closest friend would think to look." The sound of boots on the back porch made them both turn. More men moving into position. Red's escape routes were closing like a trap. "Webb figured it out in the end," Sarah continued. "Tommy trusted you with his life every day on that set. If he hid those photographs, he would have made sure you could find them. Even if he didn't have time to tell you directly." Red's throat felt like sandpaper. Tommy's tackle box burned with everything else when his widow left town. "Maybe. Or maybe you found it first. Maybe you've been sitting on the biggest secret in Hollywood history for 30 years, too scared to cash in." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Either way, you're going to help me look." Red stared at the gun in Sarah's steady hand, his mind cycling through 3 decades of careful lies he'd told himself. The tackle box hadn't burned. He'd found it in Tommy's Airstream trailer while the studio people were busy cordoning off the blast site, arguing with local authorities about jurisdiction and liability. The hidden compartment had been exactly where Tommy said it would be, lined with oiled cloth, sealed against moisture and time. "You don't understand what you're asking for," Red said, his voice barely above a whisper. The boots outside had gone silent, which meant they were in position. Professional killers knew how to wait. Those photographs, they didn't just threaten Wayne's career. Webb was right about that much. Sarah's grip on the pistol never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or hunger. "Tell me." Red closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in 1960, 24 years old and naive enough to believe that Hollywood magic could somehow stay clean. The memory unfolded like a poisonous flower, opening that tackle box in the dim light of Tommy's trailer, pulling out a manila envelope that felt heavier than lead. The photographs inside had been professional quality, crisp black and white images that captured a moment in time with devastating clarity. A hotel room in Washington, D.C., a senator's wife whose husband chaired the Armed Services Committee, and John Wayne, younger then but still recognizable, caught in a moment of intimacy that would have destroyed more than just his marriage. The woman was Marion Caldwell, Red said, the words tasting like ashes. Her husband controlled defense contracts worth hundreds of millions. The studio was bidding for exclusive rights to military cooperation on war pictures, access to bases, equipment, personnel. Wayne was supposed to charm her at a fundraiser, maybe take some harmless publicity photos. Sarah's breathing had quickened. Outside, a radio crackled, brief coded communications that suggested their time was running short. The sun was beginning to set, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber that reminded Red of the desert sunsets he might never see again. But Morrison was there, Red continued, each word scraping his throat raw. He was blackmailing studio executives, but he saw an opportunity for bigger game. He photographed Wayne and Marion Caldwell in a moment that looked compromising, even though nothing actually happened between them. The truth was worse than any lie Red had constructed over 30 years of silence. Wayne had been protecting the woman's reputation as much as his own. She'd had too much champagne at the fundraiser, gotten sick, and Wayne had helped her to a private room to recover. Morrison's photographs captured the moment Wayne was helping her to the bathroom, but the angle suggested something entirely different. One photograph could have ended Wayne's career, Red said, but the real damage would have been to Marion Caldwell. Her husband would have divorced her, destroyed her, probably had her committed, and the defense contracts would have gone to a different studio, one with connections to Morrison's real employers. Sarah's face had gone pale. What real employers? Red heard the sound of his own breathing, loud and ragged in the gathering dusk. The weight of 30 years' silence pressed down on his shoulders like the red rock formations that surrounded his failing ranch. He'd carried this secret through 3 decades of exile, through bankruptcy and loneliness, and nights when whiskey couldn't drown the sound of Tommy's voice calling his name. Morrison wasn't just a blackmailer, Red whispered. He was working for people who wanted to control which studios got military contracts, which pictures got made, which stories got told. The photographs weren't about money, they were about power, the power to shape how America saw itself, one movie at a time. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her gun hand trembled for the first time since she'd revealed her true identity. Outside, engines rumbled closer, the sound of expensive vehicles navigating the rough cattle trails that led to Red's property. Whoever had made that phone call wasn't content to let their hired help handle this alone. Tommy died because he wouldn't play along, Red continued, his voice growing stronger with each confession. But Wayne tried to save him, tried to save all of us. The studio heads told Wayne that if he didn't cooperate, they'd release the photographs anyway and blame him for the scandal. Either way, Marion Caldwell would be destroyed. At least this way, they said, only Tommy had to die. Sarah's mask had completely cracked now. Behind the cold professionalism, Red could see the lost child who'd grown up hearing her father's bitter stories about Hollywood betrayal. Webb had poisoned her with half-truths and lies of omission, turning her into a weapon aimed at ghosts. "The tackle box is here," Red said quietly. "Hidden where even I try not to think about it. But if I show you where it is, we're both dead before morning. Those people outside, they're not here to negotiate. They're here to bury the last evidence that any of this ever happened." Sarah's gun hand dropped to her side as the full weight of her situation became clear. She wasn't hunting treasure. She was bait in a trap 30 years in the making. Red watched Sarah's face transform as the realization hit her, the careful mask of controlled vengeance cracking like old paint. Her father had sent her here to die, not for justice, not even for money, but to clean up the last loose thread in a conspiracy that had outlived its usefulness. Webb knew they were coming for him, Red said, his voice gentle now, almost fatherly. The cancer was just convenient timing. They'd been watching you since his diagnosis, waiting to see if he'd told you anything useful before he died. Sarah's gun hand shook violently. "No, he was my father. He loved me. Marcus Webb never loved anything but money and leverage." Red took a careful step closer, his hands visible and empty. "That phone call wasn't meant to warn me about you. It was meant to confirm your location. You've been carrying a tracking device this whole time, probably something he gave you as a keepsake." Sarah's free hand flew instinctively to the silver locket around her neck, a final gift from her dying father, she'd said. Her face went white as understanding dawned. The locket wasn't just jewelry, it was a beacon that had led killers straight to Red's door. Outside, the engines had gone silent. Professional killers didn't announce their final approach. 30 years, Red continued, each word heavy with accumulated grief. 30 years I've been waiting for this moment, knowing that someday the past would catch up. But I thought it would be investigators, maybe federal agents. I never imagined they'd use a daughter seeking answers about a father she never really knew. The kitchen window exploded inward in a shower of glass and wooden splinters. Red threw himself sideways, tackling Sarah to the floor as bullets punched through the walls above their heads. Her pistol skittered across the linoleum, disappearing under the old refrigerator. "The cellar," Red gasped, army crawling toward a throw rug that concealed a trap door. "Tommy's tackle box is down there, along with 30 years of evidence I've been too scared to touch." Sarah followed him, tears streaming down her dust-covered face. Behind them, the front door splintered under the impact of a battering ram. Professional voices called out tactical positions. These weren't studio security guards or Hollywood fixers. They moved like military, spoke like federal agents, and shot like people who'd done this many times before. Red hauled open the trapdoor, revealing a ladder that descended into darkness. The cellar beneath his house was older than the building above, carved from living rock by settlers who'd known that survival sometimes meant disappearing underground. They dropped into musty blackness just as boots thundered across the kitchen floor above. Red fumbled for a battery-powered lantern, its weak glow revealing shelves lined with canned goods and forgotten Christmas decorations. In the far corner, beneath a canvas tarp, sat a metal tackle box that hadn't been opened since 1960. "My whole life was a lie," Sarah whispered, staring at the box as if it might bite her. "Everything he told me about Hollywood, about Wayne, about seeking justice for the innocent. It was all manipulation." Red knelt beside the tackle box, his arthritic fingers working the latches Tommy had installed 40 years ago. The mechanism still functioned perfectly, opening with a soft click that seemed to echo through decades. Inside, beneath the expected fishing lures and line weights, lay the false bottom Tommy had crafted with such care. Red pried it loose with a screwdriver, revealing the oiled cloth package that had haunted his dreams for 3 decades. The photographs were exactly as he remembered, crisp black and white images that told a story of innocence twisted into scandal. But beneath them lay something Sarah's father had never mentioned: pages of handwritten notes documenting the conspiracy that had killed Tommy Brennan and destroyed John Wayne's faith in the country he'd spent his career celebrating. "Webb wasn't Morrison's partner," Red said, reading Tommy's careful handwriting by lantern light. "He was their cleanup man. Morrison had gotten greedy, started keeping evidence instead of destroying it. Webb's job was to eliminate Morrison and recover the photographs before they could damage the defense contracts." Above them, heavy footsteps moved systematically through Red's house, searching room by room. Professional voices called out clearance codes, coordinating their hunt with military precision. Sarah picked up one of Tommy's notes, her hand trembling as she read her father's real role in the conspiracy. He killed Morrison. And then, he helped them set up Tommy's murder. "Wayne figured it out too late to save Tommy," Red said, his voice barely audible above the sounds of destruction upstairs. "But he saved me, and he made sure Tommy's evidence survived. The studio promised him they'd bury the story forever if he kept quiet about what really happened." Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes bright with tears and rage. "My father didn't die from cancer, did he? They killed him because he was the last living witness." Red nodded grimly. "And now we are." The cellar trapdoor creaked open above them, spilling harsh artificial light into their sanctuary. They were out of time, out of options, and out of places to run. But for the first time in 30 years, Red Kellerman was no longer carrying his secrets alone. A voice called down from above, smooth, cultured, carrying decades of authority. "Mr. Kellerman, there's no need to make this more difficult than necessary." Red recognized the voice from the phone call, though he'd never heard it in person. The man who descended the ladder moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to having others handle physical confrontations. Silver-haired, expensive suit, somehow still immaculate despite the evening's violence. He looked like what he was, the last surviving architect of a conspiracy that had shaped American cinema for 30 years. "Director Hastings," Red said, the name tasting like copper in his mouth. "Still cleaning up messes for the studio system, I see." "The studio system died with the moguls, Red. May I call you Red?" Hastings stepped delicately around the scattered evidence, his polished shoes avoiding the dust that covered everything else in the cellar. "What we have now is something far more sophisticated, more necessary." Sarah pressed herself against the stone wall, clutching one of Tommy's handwritten pages. "You killed my father. Marcus Webb killed himself the moment he decided to involve you in this." Hastings examined the tackle box with professional interest, as if appraising an antique. Cancer was simply nature's way of providing convenient timing. "We would have preferred he take his secrets to the grave quietly." Red felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. 30 years of silence, of self-imposed exile, of letting fear override conscience. Above them, the footsteps had stopped. Professional killers knew when to wait for orders. The photographs aren't the real threat anymore, Red said, struggling to his feet despite his aching knees. Tommy's notes document everything. Names, dates, bank transfers. He spent weeks investigating before he died, figuring out connections that went far beyond Hollywood. Timothy Brennan was always too thorough for his own good. Hastings picked up one of the photographs, studying it with detached interest. Do you know what's remarkable about this image? Senator Caldwell's wife went on to champion veterans' causes for another 20 years. Her husband's committee funded projects that employed thousands of people, built careers, shaped American foreign policy, all because we chose discretion over scandal. Sarah's voice cracked with rage. You murdered innocent people to protect your business interests. We protected something larger than business, my dear. We protected the machinery that builds national myths. Hastings set the photograph down gently, as if it were made of spun glass. John Wayne understood this eventually. The man the public needed him to be was more important than the man he actually was. Red thought about Wayne in those final years, the growing distance between them, the careful letters that said everything except what mattered. The Duke had carried his own burden of silence, his own weight of necessary compromise. Perhaps that was the real tragedy, how the conspiracy had turned heroes into accomplices, victims into enablers. Tommy died because he believed truth mattered more than legend, Red said, but you couldn't afford to let him prove that the whole system was built on lies. The system produces dreams, Red. Dreams that comfort grieving mothers, inspire young soldiers, give meaning to sacrifice. Hastings moved closer, his voice taking on the cadence of a sermon. What would you have had us do? Let these photographs destroy not just Wayne's career, but the faith of millions who needed to believe in American righteousness? The question hung in the dusty air like incense, carrying the weight of 3 decades' rationalization. Red had asked himself the same thing countless nights, staring at the ceiling of his failing ranch house, wondering if his silence made him complicit or wise. You want to know the truth about your father, Sarah? Hastings turned his attention to the young woman trembling against the wall. Marcus Webb was the most patriotic man I ever knew. He understood that some secrets serve the greater good. His only mistake was believing you would understand that distinction. Sarah's hand found the silver locket at her throat, the tracking device that had led them all to this moment. He used me. He gave you purpose, a reason to complete his final mission. Hastings smiled with what might have been genuine warmth. Bringing you here was never about revenge, my dear. It was about ensuring that Red would finally turn over the evidence voluntarily. Fathers often love their children more than their principles. Red felt something cold settle in his chest as the trap's true dimensions became clear. Sarah wasn't just bait, she was leverage, and somewhere in the darkness above them, professional killers waited to discover whether love or fear would prove the stronger motivator. The old stuntman looked at the young woman who'd brought 30 years of buried guilt into his kitchen, and made the choice Tommy Brennan would have expected of him. He reached for the tackle box, and everything changed forever. Red's weathered hands closed around the tackle box handle, but instead of lifting it toward Hastings, he swung it hard against the stone wall. The metal container exploded in a shower of sparks and scattered evidence, photographs fluttering through the dusty air like dying birds. You want Tommy's truth? Red shouted over Hastings' cry of rage. Take it all or take nothing. Sarah dove for the scattered papers as boots thundered down the cellar stairs. Red threw himself at Hastings, 64 years of cowboy strength meeting 70 years of bureaucratic softness. They crashed into the shelves, canned goods raining down around them. Kill them both. Hastings gasped, but Red had anticipated this moment for 3 decades. His cellar had more than one exit. Sarah, the coal chute! Red pointed to a narrow opening near the ceiling, barely visible in the lantern's dying glow. She scrambled up the shelves like the athlete she'd pretended not to be, clutching a handful of Tommy's documentation. Gunfire erupted behind them as Red hauled himself through the chute, his old bones protesting every inch of the climb. They emerged into twilight behind his barn, Monument Valley's red spires standing witness to their desperate escape, but Sarah had stopped running. She stood in the gathering darkness, staring at one of Tommy's pages by starlight, her face transformed by a revelation that cut deeper than fear. He knew. she whispered. Tommy knew about the defense contracts, but that's not why they killed him. Red heard vehicles starting, professional voices coordinating pursuit. They had minutes, maybe less, before Hastings' killers found them. Sarah, we have to move. Morrison wasn't blackmailing the studio. She thrust the page at him, her voice breaking with the weight of understanding. He was blackmailing the Pentagon. The photographs were just cover for the real evidence, documents proving that military contracts were being awarded based on which studios would produce the most pro-war propaganda. Red felt the ground shift beneath him as 30 years of assumptions crumbled. The conspiracy hadn't been about protecting John Wayne's reputation, it had been about controlling America's perception of its own wars, one movie at a time. Tommy found Morrison's real evidence, Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. Financial records showing how the Pentagon was using Hollywood to manufacture consent for military operations. My father wasn't just a cleanup man, he was CIA. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Wayne's guilt hadn't been about failing to save Tommy. It had been about discovering that his entire career, his whole identity as America's cowboy hero, had been carefully orchestrated by intelligence agencies who needed a symbol that would make war look noble. The tackle box was never the real threat, Red realized. Tommy hid the Pentagon documents somewhere else. Sarah nodded, her hand moving to her father's locket. Webb spent 30 years searching for them. That's why he raised me, why he trained me. He thought Tommy might have told you where they were hidden. Flashlight beams swept across the barn walls, growing closer. Red could hear Hastings' voice directing the search, no longer smooth and cultured but sharp with desperation. Tommy never told me about any Pentagon documents, Red said, but there's one place I never looked. He led Sarah to the old windmill that had pumped water for his cattle before the well ran dry. Tommy had helped him repair it during their last week together, joking about how some things were built to last longer than the men who made them. Red's fingers found the loose stone in the windmill's foundation, exactly where Tommy's sense of irony would have placed it. Inside the hidden cavity lay a waterproof case containing microfilm and a letter addressed to Red in Tommy's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, Red whispered, then my suspicions about Morrison were correct, and I'm probably dead. The microfilm documented a partnership between the Pentagon and Hollywood that went back to World War II, systematic manipulation of American cinema to promote military objectives, with John Wayne as the unwitting centerpiece of a psychological operation that had shaped 2 generations of Americans. Sarah's father had killed Morrison not to protect a studio, but to protect a national security operation that treated truth as a strategic liability. Tommy had died because he'd discovered that America's most beloved cowboy was actually its most effective propaganda tool. Wayne never knew, Sarah said, reading over Red's shoulder. According to this, he thought he was serving his country by making patriotic films. He had no idea the Pentagon was feeding him scripts designed to make war look heroic. Flashlights converged on their position. Hastings appeared at the edge of the barn's shadow, no longer bothering with civilized pretense. Behind him, armed figures moved with military precision. 30 years we've protected this secret, Hastings called out. 30 years of preserving the illusion that makes American power possible. Will you really destroy that for the sake of one dead stuntman's conscience? Red looked at the microfilm in his hands. Evidence that could topple governments, end careers, shatter the myths that millions of Americans use to make sense of their country's endless wars. Tommy had died protecting this truth. Webb had killed to suppress it. Now the choice fell to a broken-down stuntman and the daughter of a dead spy. Sarah met his eyes in the darkness, and Red saw Tommy's stubborn integrity reflected in her face. Red closed his fingers around the microfilm, feeling the weight of 30 years crystallize into a single moment of choice. Behind Hastings' flashlight beams, Monument Valley's ancient spires stood silent as stone witnesses, indifferent to human schemes but somehow expectant, as if the land itself waited to see whether truth or expedience would prevail. You know what Tommy would do, Sarah whispered, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd finally found her true father's legacy. Red nodded, thinking of his friend's stubborn grin, the way Tommy had always insisted that some things mattered more than survival. He'd spent 3 decades running from that principle, and the running had nearly killed him anyway. just slower, one compromise at a time. "Stand down," Red called to Hastings. "You want this evidence? Come and take it." What followed happened fast and forever simultaneously. Hastings' professionals moved with lethal precision, but Sarah moved like her father's daughter, and Red moved like a man who'd finally stopped being afraid. The microfilm changed hands 3 times before the shooting stopped, disappearing into Monument Valley's darkness as if the desert had reclaimed what belonged to it. 6 months later, Red sat on his porch watching the sunrise paint the valley walls red and gold. The ranch still struggled, cattle prices hadn't improved, the well still ran shallow, and his joints still ached with desert mornings. But something had changed in the quality of the silence. It no longer felt like hiding. The newspapers had told the story in careful fragments over several weeks: mysterious deaths of former CIA operatives, congressional investigations into Pentagon film funding, the quiet dissolution of certain military contracts. John Wayne's name never appeared in the coverage, his legend preserved by the same institutional machinery that had once exploited it. Perhaps Tommy would have called that ironic. Red chose to call it mercy. Sarah's letters came monthly, postmarked from different cities as her new life took shape. She'd kept her father's name but not his profession, trading intelligence work for investigative journalism. Her latest letter mentioned a documentary project about Hollywood's hidden history. Careful, respectful, focused on the system rather than destroying individual reputations. Some truths are more important than others, she'd written in her precise handwriting that reminded him painfully of Tommy's. The men who got used deserve better than the men who did the using. Red understood. They'd chosen to expose the machinery while protecting its most unwilling victims. Wayne had died believing in his own heroism, and that belief had comforted millions who needed their cowboys to be genuine. Sometimes mercy looked like selective blindness. The morning mail brought a package wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside, Red found a photograph he'd never seen before: Tommy and Wayne on the set of The Alamo, both men laughing at some forgotten joke, their faces bright with the possibility that movies might actually matter for good reasons. A note in Wayne's handwriting was tucked behind the photograph. For Red, some memories deserve to survive. The Duke always keeps his promises, even the late ones. Red propped the photograph on his mantelpiece, between the picture of his late wife and the bronze star he'd earned in Korea. 3 different kinds of service, 3 different ways of loving something larger than yourself. Tommy would have appreciated the symmetry. That evening, Red drove his pickup to the windmill where everything had changed. The structure stood empty now, its hidden cavity cleaned out, but the desert wind still turned its blades with the same patient rhythm that had marked time when Tommy was alive. He thought about the choices that had brought him here: the decision to stay silent, the decision to speak, the decision to keep living in the space between truth and legend. Each choice had cost something, but the alternative, surrendering either his conscience or his compassion, would have cost everything. Red pulled out his phone and dialed the number Sarah had given him for emergencies. When she answered, he could hear city traffic in the background, the sound of a life moving forward instead of looking back. "Just wanted to hear a friendly voice," he said, feeling suddenly old and surprisingly peaceful. "Bad day?" she asked, with the gentle concern of someone who understood the weight of inherited guilt. "Good day, actually. I was thinking about Tommy, about how he'd feel knowing his story finally got told the right way." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Red could picture her standing in some distant city, carrying forward the best parts of 2 fathers while leaving behind their mistakes. "I think he'd be proud of you," she said finally, not for keeping his secrets or revealing them, but for choosing love over fear when it mattered. After they hung up, Red sat beside the windmill until full darkness settled over Monument Valley. Above him, the same stars that had witnessed Tommy's death now watched over his vindication. The desert held both truths equally: loss and redemption, silence and speech, the eternal patience of stone and the brief, bright courage of human hearts that refused to stop caring. Some stories, Red realized, stayed with you not because they ended perfectly, but because they ended honestly. That seemed like enough.